today, just as interesting. There we go, just got the message about the recording. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. So we've got a pretty wide variety of speakers today, and the structure of today's event, as you probably know, is going to be pretty fluid and not too formal, because what we really want to encourage is open conversations and discussions after our speakers have given their speech. So yeah, essentially the reason why we wanted to put on this event was to kind of start a dialogue about social class in higher education, and I guess working towards destigmatizing those conversations, but also changing the narrative, steering the narrative away from looking at low participation backgrounds and coming from a working class background as being a deficit of some sort, and looking at actually the the benefits that this can have, and more importantly the benefits that people from different backgrounds bring to the university community. So today the panel will be talking about a range of different things, including the inequalities that exist in kind of education before university, and how that kind of seeps through to the university community, and how universities become entangled in narratives of social justice, which is kind of held in tension with the marketization of higher education. So yeah, that's kind of one of the key things that we'll be touching on today. And yeah, I guess one of the biggest aims is for us to recognize the richness of our university community, and to do that, it's really important that we kind of think beyond traditional or accepted measures of success, and kind of look a bit more widely. And yeah, stop thinking of students as a homogenous group, and kind of really appreciate all of the different experiences that they bring, and therefore all of the different kind of value that they bring to the university community. So that's kind of my intro bit done. The interesting part is yet to come. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our very first speaker, who is Dr. Iwi Ugiabe-Green from the School of Business. Yeah, I think I'll just hand straight over to you.
Good morning, everybody. That took me by surprise. I didn't realise I was going first, but I'm happy to go first. If I can work out how to share my screen, I should be good at this, but I'm really not. I don't tend to use Zoom that much. Let's see. Okay, can everyone see this first slide?
Yeah, I can.
Fantastic. So yes, thank you very much for inviting me today. I am really humbled to be here, really pleased to be here. As you can see from the picture, I am Black, probably you've noticed that, I'm Black, and I do have a working class background despite the accent, which I'll come on to. I work here as an associate professor in the School of Accounting and Finance in the Business School. I've been at Leeds for 2.5 years. It's been an amazing experience. Despite being an associate professor, I'm not going to come at this from a research perspective. This is a very kind of personalised account, some narratives and some stories that I think have been important in the context of my working class background, and what that's meant for my development in the academy, and my perspectives on how students should be supported within the academy. So I have put a trigger warning because it is quite a personal account. There may be things that I'll talk about that might be triggering for people, or that some people might find a little bit uncomfortable. So it's just a pre-warning about that in advance. So this is a picture of my mum. She doesn't look like this anymore. The baby that she's holding is me. I think I was about 6 months old. I was born in Birmingham, which surprises a lot of people, although I went to a conference a few years ago and somebody picked up, I don't know how, but picked up a bit of a Brummie accent in my accent and asked me if I was from Birmingham. So I am. I was born in Birmingham in the UK. As I say, my mum was 21 when she had me. My mum and dad met at a bus stop in Birmingham, and the rest is history. My mum's Jamaican, my dad's Nigerian. My mum left school when she was 16, and my dad was actually in the UK on a federal scholarship. We do have a class system in Nigeria, in wider Africa, but he himself is very much from what I think most people would frame as a working class background as well, as was my mum. So I grew up in social housing in a big high-rise block of flats in Perry Bar in Birmingham. And I'm told that I tried to escape from those flats a few times, toddling out. We left Birmingham when I was 7. So that might explain some of the reason why I don't really carry the Brummie accent with me anymore. So fast forward to age 16. This is actually my last day of school, which is why I think I've got a photo, because people were taking photos on the last day. I attended the local comprehensive high school. I wasn't bright enough to get into the grammar school, took the 12+ and failed. That whole host of problems with that, which I won't go into. But actually, despite struggling at high school, have some really, really happy memories. And I think I was recognised as somebody who was fairly talented in different ways. So I was deputy head girl. I was captain of various sports teams. And that was brilliant because that gave me some sense of pride. Because as I'll come on to talk about, school was quite difficult for me. I was very visible, hyper visible, mainly because we were poor. And a lot of people who I went to school with were quite privileged. And obviously I'm Black, and the only other Black student at the school was my sister. We did have other racially minoritized students at the school, mainly Asian students. I was on free school meals. So I don't know if anybody else here had this experience, but we used to have orange tickets that you used to have to take to go and claim your dinner. So it was really visible to everybody else that you were on free school meals because they could see you handing over this symbolic ticket. I lived on a council estate. I had friends at school, but they didn't come around. So I had quite a high sense of shame, I would say, very early on about my home environment, which was quite difficult. Grew up with mum and dad, loved by my family and all the rest of it, but quite complicated with some of the sort of cultural and heritage norms that we had and how that conflicted against some of the norms that I would see at school, and coupled with the fact that we were quite poor. So I was bullied at school, which isn't unusual for people, but I think it's quite significant that I was bullied by a person. I put initials in for people who I'm not being disparaging about, but perhaps don't come out in the best light. So VW, that was a person who bullied me at school, and this particular person was a mixed heritage student who was adopted by a wealthy white family. And I had quite a serious assault, myself and my sister, which we endured, which isolated us from the church community, which was a Black community, very important to us and to other Black families who we came to know through church, and we became very isolated and displaced as a result. So fast forward to age 18, where I did relatively well in my GCSEs and went on to the local sixth form at the grammar school. So this compounded my sense of shame because even more privileged people attended this school. I became very marginalised. So whilst at high school, despite some of the issues that I had, as I said, being deputy head girl, I had some sort of status, I had some sort of voice, I was quite popular, and then came into an environment where I was just very, very marginalised and disempowered by the environment around me. Continued to be bullied by this particular person who was in the year above me and had gone to the sixth form. I was in a squad that was brought together by a girl who had attended the grammar school right from the beginning, who was also from a working class background, and she sort of rounded us up. So I was in a squad of 4 girls who hadn't attended, one of whom had attended the school before. We were all from working class backgrounds, which I think is quite interesting. We gravitated together and we really formed a strong bond. When I was at high school, I'd made a friend with somebody, IH, who was from an affluent background, and I'd been invited round to her house. And this was the first time I'd been to anybody's house other than family members. And I was absolutely bowled over by the environment that she was in. I'd not seen anything like it before. And I ranted and raved about it when I went to school. And she had to tell me to stop talking about her house, because people were finding out about her house because I was talking about it, not realizing that that's like not the done thing, right? This particular person, who I'm friends with today, she's lovely, but she herself, at the age of just turned 18, got married because she met an older guy, and unbeknown to most people, was pregnant when she got married. She'd secured a place at Oxford, which she didn't take up because of the baby, and later went on to take up. But the reason why I raise this story is because she wasn't stigmatized at all, and I do think that has a lot to do with her class. And I do think if that was me, for example, the story would be very different. So the fact that she was then able to go on to Oxford later on, again, I think is because of some of the affordances that are brought to you when you have a particular background. I wasn't that academically strong, so I did fairly well in my GCSEs, as I say, but then I was in this environment where everyone was brilliant and I was really bottom of the pile. And I was very much put in my place by teachers. I'd had a very supportive teacher network when I was at high school and had thrived, as I said, in lots of spaces. Absolutely did not have that in this school and regressed massively. And I was also having counselling for the trauma that I'd experienced previously. So what did working class mean to me? And I think it's really important to note that being working class means different things to different people. And I know there's lots of debate in the literature about what working class means. I think there is definitely a sense that things are more difficult for people from a working class background. But my argument would be that that isn't to do with the individual, that is to do with the environment and the social structures and the things that are around you that make things difficult and put you in certain positions and put you in certain places that make things to be quite difficult for you as you progress through. So for me, everyone's got their own story. This is my story. Opportunity issues. So I didn't see the world beyond my world at home, which was quite difficult. We didn't go on holiday, really. We had a few sort of local holidays that I remember, but generally we didn't go on holidays abroad. We did go to Nigeria. That was really important to my dad. So I had that connection with my heritage. Continuously positioned in deficit by teachers and peers and people around me. I had agency issues. I suffered terribly with imposter syndrome. I felt really lucky to be allowed into certain spaces. And this sense of not fulfilling my potential when I got to this really disabling environment for me was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I had capital issues. We were poor. I didn't know people, I didn't have networks, I didn't have contacts, I didn't know how to navigate things, and I didn't understand people from other cultures. And I was on one identity there, and then I was really just confused in this other identity, in this other environment where I was trying to find myself. So fast forward to age 21. One thing I will say, I am loved. My parents love me. I'm from a very, despite some of the issues, you know, mum and dad are still together. We're quite a big family. So I don't want to kind of feed into that narrative that can sometimes follow people. But my dad did press the importance of education. And despite everything, my dad's always kind of worked in education in different ways. I bombed my A-levels. I went to Huddersfield through clearing. Didn't know what I was going to do. When I say I bombed my A-levels, I had aspirations to go into medicine, and I was very, very far away from that. Anyway, went to university, and it was freeing, is how I would describe it. It opened my eyes, opened my world, brought me into contact with people that I'd never been in contact with before, but I still felt very displaced. But it was transformative. I met my husband on the first day of university. So it was transformative in lots of different ways. I was driven from the end of university to reclaim, for me, my dignity, which meant being respected and being able to exercise my agency. I wanted to be financially independent, because even throughout university, I was very lucky. I was able to access grants and financial help that was still available to people back then. I wanted to be respected, because this deficit association followed me the whole way through. And I wanted to have choice about my life opportunities, which I think is something that economic capital can bring. So you'll have noticed I'm not from Yorkshire, as I've spoken about before. And actually, my accent has worked for me in other ways. You know, people tell me I've got quite a posh accent. I think that's purely because I was raised in Middle England. So I was raised in Dunchurch near Rugby, which is in Warwickshire. So I don't really have a strong regional accent. And of course, people make assumptions when you first see someone, and the first thing that people see when they see me is that I'm Black, and have assumptions about what I would sound like. So my accent's actually become quite disarming. It kind of lets me into spaces that I otherwise don't think I'd be allowed to be into, or certainly would find more difficult to access. And I found that through my working career as well, definitely has opened up opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have been there. People make assumptions about how much economic capital I have or had. So because I apparently sound posh, people would make assumptions that that meant then that I've had people say I went to an independent school or a public school, or, you know, and the economic capital that people assumed that I had, that I certainly did not. So I made a conscious decision very early on, being someone who observes things, not to be the angry Black woman and not to fulfill that stereotype bias. So even when I was suffering through school, I was always very sunny. And I think that's one of the things that led me to being quite popular when I was in that first school, and deputy head girl, as I say. So I learned to mimic people, because home was very different from school. And I didn't really have other environments. I wasn't allowed to play at friends' houses and all that kind of stuff. So school was the place where I kind of learned this is what you do or say, and that followed me throughout work. And I desperately wanted to fit in. So my heritage and my culture was very, very separate from the identity that I showed to people in those spaces. Come age 28, I started to find myself, is probably the best way of describing it, because I felt validated. I was getting promoted at work. I've done lots of qualifications, and that started to validate me. And people might think that that's ridiculous or wrong, but for my experience, that was certainly what that brought to me. And I started to embrace my culture, my sense of self. I really anchored myself and found my voice. And I decided that I wanted to be an academic. So that is my husband, who is one of the whitest people that you will find. But we had 2 weddings, and one was a traditional wedding in Nigeria. And that was really important to both of us. So that cultural heritage was something that I really wanted to own. So fast forward, I'm not going to reveal quite how old I am, but yeah, wanted to get to Leeds, really, not desperate, but had been a long-held ambition. I worked at Leeds Beckett for many years, and I did my PhD at Leeds. And I came to Leeds, and that imposter syndrome followed me. And it followed me because I would have comments like, so have you really got a PhD? Yeah. And is your PhD from Leeds? Yeah. Not Leeds Beckett, Leeds. Yeah, Leeds. So, you know, that whole thing, and that whole thing of being very visible again, and very conscious that the background of the people whom I was working with was not a shared experience that I had had. So many people that I work with had gone to grammar school or public school, had gone to Russell Group universities for their degrees, etc., etc. Lots of complex intersections, which I won't come on to. Identity is complicated. But I think, as was said right at the beginning by Carolina, you know, class is definitely a social construct, which is a really, really important part of identity and your identity formation and who you are. But I have got to a place where I definitely can look in the mirror and say that I live my authentic self, and I care massively about marginalised students' experiences. And it's a hard place to be because, as I say, I'm an accountant, and it's not really something that you associate with accounting, right? So that in itself is quite difficult, but I do engage in purposeful equity work that looks to address issues of equality of opportunity. So success for me has been enhancing these different capitals, and it's not just about money, it's other stuff as well. But I do feel like I've reclaimed my agency and I have more choice over my life opportunities. I'm really proud of my working class background. That's why I'm really pleased to be here and be able to talk about it. And I'm proud of it for lots of different reasons. And I'm proud now that I use that to try and disrupt systems that I think are inequitable. I don't see myself as elevated, I just see myself as reclaiming me and having thrived through a system that isn't designed for people like me. But the biggest source of pride that I have is that I have, I think, opened up access to opportunities for my children, which is something that I didn't have that much of when I was younger. So why does it matter? It matters because all students deserve to be supported, nurtured, and so the work that Bridget's doing around compassionate conversations and pedagogical wellbeing is hugely important. The I Belong initiative that many of you might have heard about is for everybody, but the reason why equity work is so important is about recognising the differences, that we're not a homogenous collective group of students and everyone, as Carolina said, success looks different for everybody and everyone's journey is different. Working class students themselves are not a homogenous group, but for me, what I would say is a unifying characteristic is around sort of struggle and oppression by the system and how they are othered or positioned. And this is very much imposed by environmental conditions. And it's not a deficit to be working class, and absolutely not. But I do think it's important to recognise that it can be more difficult to access opportunities, those networks, those contacts, those things that can make your life a little bit easier to get to where you want to be if you do come from a working class background. So the other thing, I mean, I could talk about this for days probably, but just to say, you know, for me, racism and capitalism are absolutely fundamentally interlinked. This intergenerational wealth accumulation and networks and contacts and all the rest of it, as I say, is definitely something that impacted on the start of my journey. But, you know, you crack on, that's what you have to do. But for me, every single person deserves to have the best opportunities and the access to those opportunities to be the best people that they can be. And class is a really important part of that. So that's me done. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for that, Iwi. That was incredible. Yeah, thank you for sharing, you know, such personal stories and like really going into your background. I found that really, really interesting, and it's been great to kind of have an insight into, yeah, I guess how your own personal story has shaped the way that you look at things like class and intersectionality and, you know, how that functions within higher education. So yeah, thank you so much. I think a lot of the things that you mentioned as well around like imposter syndrome and like the microaggressions that you'd experienced, you know, after doing your PhD, I'm sure that resonated with a lot of people. So thank you. And I'm sure we'll come back to this when we go into our discussion portion. I also realized that in the introduction, I forgot to introduce myself because I was so excited to hear all the speakers. So quickly, I'm Carolina, the Education Officer from LUU. Yeah, that's all. But yeah, thank you so much, Iwi. And I think up next, I will be handing over to Dr. Adam Formby from York St John University, who's our next speaker.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carolina. Hi, everyone. Very nice to see you. Very nice to meet many of you. I'll get my slides up and running so we get moving. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really fascinating. I love all of that. It's really interesting. Hopefully you can see my slides, and this is all coming on your screen. You'd like to think I know what I'm doing with this now, you know, after having a year of it, but we'll see how this works out. Can I just check that all there, that all on your screens and stuff?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for inviting me to do this today. I'm excited to come talk about this. I'm going to time myself for 50 minutes. So I don't want to take all the time up. We've got fantastic talks coming from Luke and other speakers as well. So I don't want to take up loads of time. But what I'm going to talk about today is similar to the previous speaker, this deficit model thing, what it is, how we try and get around it. And I think for me, as someone who as somebody come from who's first gen into university, somebody come from a background where university is weird, if I'm honest, in lots of ways. Even as someone who works in it, I find it still weird. It's an interesting thing to reflect on, because I think that there's this kind of identity formation thing, this weird kind of tension you sometimes feel. And I want to kind of explore that. And this deficit model is maybe the reason why. So there's my details. If you want to email me or hear me tweet stuff about this, very happy to get in touch with you. I'm based at York University. I used to work at Leeds, sadly not anymore. It's a fantastic uni. I do miss it an awful lot. And I miss particularly the working class students who I used to teach, who were wonderful. So yeah, please do get in touch if interested. So for me today, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about my own background a little bit later on, but I'm just going to talk about some of the kind of big policy narratives that I think are important to reflect on in regards to accessing HE, the inequalities that are stopping marginalised groups from accessing HE, and what we call widening participation policies that are trying to do something about these issues and trying to make university better, trying to introduce more inclusivity. My particular background and research background is in an area is in sociology and the social sciences. And I particularly work with a Uni Connect group called Go Higher West Yorkshire, who I'm sure you might be familiar with already. I've worked with Go Higher for about 3 years now, and we essentially are involved with quite a large project in trying to introduce widening participation policies in communities which have quite low representation in terms of HE access. So we go around trying to figure out ways to help people get to university in communities where that's never happened before. That's what we try to do. And I particularly do that across Leeds, Bradford and Wakefield. And I want to talk a bit about how we've tried to negotiate some of these questions around the deficit model in particular in this talk. So there's 2 questions for this talk. I want to talk about what is this deficit model thing? How's it shaping access to HE? And then I'm going to talk about something more reflexive, our own community values from who we are, our own identities before we get to HE, and why they're important to keep with us, why it's important to not be ashamed of who you are, basically. And I think that's so key. And as the previous talk emphasized, like it's difficult sometimes, students and lecturers, and making spaces for us to do that is difficult. So I want to reflect on that a little bit as well, and how we try to, do something better, I think, especially in the Russell group in particular, I think. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So this deficit model thing, as many of you will know, it refers to this idea that when you start reflecting on access and wider participation, we started really kind of getting into wider participation policies in a big way in the mid-90s in particular. More money started getting put into it. There was a realization of just how inaccessible HE was, despite the fact that they wanted more people going to university. The inequalities started to become even more clearer. And at that point, there was often quite well-intentioned wider participation initiatives and things like, open days and so on, to try and get people into university. But they often were almost kind of based on this kind of deficit or victim blaming model. An assumption that class identity needs to kind of shift to kind of meet the needs or be in line with often kind of very middle class aspirational values of university. So to get on at uni, to be successful, you've got to almost kind of change who you are a little bit. And I personally, I want to talk a bit later on, this is something I still struggle with now. I used to have an accent, a Scouse accent. It's disappeared. I don't know why. And everyone at home reminds me of this constantly. And it's a strange thing that I feel quite sad about, to be honest. University and the values that kind of underpin it are often unconsciously kind of underpinned by these kind of middle class aspirational values. And I could talk about the theory about this, the cultural capital, the Bourdieuian kind of stuff. But I just want to talk about it more kind of more in a more kind of everyday sense, because I just feel as if like it's worth us just reflecting what this means in a more practical way. But I think the key thing about the deficit model is that by failing to acknowledge this thing happening, that this is here and it's something there, HE institutions almost inadvertently adopt deficit models, even when they try to avoid it. They almost accidentally kind of do these things sometimes. And I've seen this at different universities I've worked at, and this is something which I think is really key to reflect on if we're going to make this better and truly make university inclusive as it should be. So that's the deficit model, a very slimmed down, quick version of that. There's a lot more to say about it, but just a quick landscape of what it actually is and what it isn't. And then we've got this question, of course, like that obviously that I reflect on a lot. What do we do about it? You know, how do we make this thing better a little bit? So I'm going to talk about here about Go Higher West Yorkshire and the work they do. Go Higher West Yorkshire are a wonderful organisation, and frankly, I'm a research evaluator for them, so I help them with the evaluation side of their work. And my motivation to do so is based around being, you know, first-gen university student myself. I went to University of York 2005, which is a long time ago, far too long to make me feel comfortable. 16 years ago. It's quite scary thinking about that. And like many people in that situation, I found it to be quite strange. The one thing that got me there was widening participation policies, those kind of open days and those kind of support mechanisms that were often in place at the time. And this is why I research this now. I'm a keen believer in trying to, you know, make things better that I benefit from, making things better for people that have come after me, if that makes sense. So I've always loved working with Go Higher. They're a fantastic organisation. And one of the things that Go Higher look to do is, rather than kind of go in there and say, right, have an open day or have this thing, they try to reflect on the community values of the groups they're working with. So things about diversity and identity is quite key to how we approach our policy platforms. We work across many communities. We work across 29 wards across Leeds, Bradford and Wakefield. And these are labelled as Polar 3 and 4. For those that might not be familiar with this, this is a particular governmental instrument that kind of basically stipulates HG access representation through a percentage, through a proportion. And what we try to do is work in these communities to try and make things better and so on. And just to give you a bit of an example of our approach and what we do, this is a map of West Yorkshire, and these are communities that we work with. We work across Bradford, across Leeds, we work across Wakefield, and of course, all our communities we work in are diverse. They've got kind of complexities, they've got many different resources and so on, and we're often trying to think about the ways in which we can help different communities that help them in terms of their own community values and so on. For instance, in Wakefield, it's a very different set of WP than you might find in Leeds, simply because Wakefield's an old mining town. There's a different view of higher education there. If you can see universities around you, and and Leeds University dominates the skyline, and you can see it from around the city, that might not be the place in other contexts where there isn't there isn't a university locally. So we have to think about how we approach that question differently and so on. Same with Bradford and so on as well. These complexities kind of feature in our work quite a lot. And what we've tried to do in the 4 or 5 years that we've been running is reflect on the different ways in which we can support different communities and help them in our work. So to give you some examples of how this helps us with the deficit model I referred to before, we come up with a form of widening participation which is based around communities. And we reflect on context. We think about how WP might help a distinct community in a distinct way. For instance, we've run projects that kind of are built around being proud of where you're from. So we've got this lovely project called in Overden, called our Overden, which is all about young learners taking pictures of their community and getting a sense of self through that and building up the confidence to be who they are and so on. We try to build up a kind of a principle of getting a sense of place with our work. So rather than HG being this weird, strange, big, scary thing, we say, don't worry about all that. What we're interested in is helping you be who you are, right? And by doing that, we can support young people in lots of different ways. And this helps us to really reframe what widening participation could be. It makes it more communitarian, makes it more redistributive, makes it more egalitarian, I hope, as well. By tapping into the social relations that our learners inhabit daily, we found that WP has the potential to be much more transformative, much more fairer in the support it can offer young people. And what we hope is much more effective too. You know, there's also a governmental, you know, the government are always saying to us, you know, they're always questioning us on how we spend our money. So we've also got that dimension as well, you know, proving that this works and so on. And that's a big deal for me, you know, as an evaluator. This is an example of this. This is the rugby league town at Featherstone. You know, we often kind of reflect on here, like, as for the values that we're working with. And I can't actually read this out because my screen's not showing me, can't actually see it. But what I hope you can see from the quote there, yeah, so I remember coming when I was really young. My fondest memories meeting my husband to play for Rovers. We try to build up policies around these community centres and spaces in different ways. And that helps us to normalise HG, to not make it seem so frightening and scary, because it can be from kind of working class identity. You feel like this is a very different world that you're about to enter into. So some examples of what we've done. I mentioned that our Overton before. We've in Castleford, we did this big housing project where we got local businesses involved, and we got young 15, 16-year-olds to go to these kind of construction sites and learn how all that works, you know, and to get a sense around what that was, you know, and we were able to really, you know, really kind of attack those gendered assumptions around who should do that work. And, you know, we're able to actually open up the idea that anyone can do this if you want to, you know, those are things we wanted to do. We focus on making things that are bespoke, community focused, and we look at informal activities. We often get them just doing mad, silly things like play with slime and whatever, you know, just to get them to think and talk, relax, and then, you know, reflect on those things. We recruit staff members from the local community itself, often local graduates from Leeds, who can talk about these experiences, who know what it's like to go through these transitions. And that helps us with mentoring. And we also liaise with community groups and local hubs in our different communities to help us as well. What we're trying to do here is give a widening participation platform that gives a sense of belonging. That's what we're here to try and do. And that's the kind of the aim of it, basically. So that all sounds great. And I hope it sounds great anyway. And what I want to see in the future is more widening participation kind of do this work. Because I think what it can do is basically get around those deficit models by kind of introducing a sense of you're allowed to be who you are. You know, you don't have to change. Don't worry about that. You know, it's okay to be who you are, like a little bit, and to make people remember that it's not something which you know, you shouldn't lose yourself in this new world that you're about to enter into. However, when they get to university, and Luke's going to talk about this in a moment, what we sometimes find is that this deficit model is still there and it's still challenging. It can still exist, and it still exists for lecturers, the staff members too, I find. And I'm going to be quite blunt about it. You know, I love working HG. I love helping my students out, but I do find it a strange place sometimes, because I sometimes think, God, do I fit here a little bit? And I found with some of my students, this is the case as well. Wherever university I've worked at, there's this kind of questions of class identity being this kind of embodiment of shame. You have this process of masking. Like you're like a different person in university sometimes than you are at home a little bit. And if you're a working class lecturer, you have this pressure to become this chameleon, like this, you change who you are to fit in with these things. And I think that's quite interesting to reflect on. These different worlds, particularly for me, I guess, really became apparent when I start reflecting on my working life. I've got here all the jobs I've ever worked at, right? I use the slide for my social work lectures, which I tend to do for second years. And I was kind of thinking to myself, it's a strange demonstration of the different worlds that I've inhabited since I was a teenager. When I was born in Southport and then Liverpool, I came up for the WP programs. You know, I worked wherever I could, factories, shop jobs, wherever. You know, my family, where my mum and dad didn't go to university or whatever, it was you get a job at 15 and that's it. You're not meant to, uni was something else. I mean, they wanted me to go to uni, but they really wanted me to get work. They still do, actually. They still take real pride in that. And when I got to university at 18, I went to University of York, which is very Russell Group, very, very Russell Group. There was a strange sense of like my experiences were just completely different from the cohorts I was mixing with. I never met people who'd gone to private school before, and suddenly there was me talking about, yeah, I'm going to go home and work in factories in the summer. They didn't get that. They just didn't understand that, you know, it was a different world. And I went to the PhD a few years later. That was self-funded. I didn't get any money for that. So I had to work 3 or 4 jobs. I worked as a social carer. I worked as a welfare officer. I taught on everything I could. And again, he had the same kind of weird, different worlds, you know. And even at that point, I could still see these class inequalities reflected in the way that I was approaching my studies, and others didn't need to worry about some of these problems like money and whether they fitted in or not. And now, you know, I went to University of Leeds as a teaching fellow, and I was in a wonderful school, sociology, social policy. Simon Prideaux, our colleague who's here today, really great example of someone who's absolutely understands, I think, some of the issues I'm talking about, the problems that you can feel sometimes in these contexts. Sociology is fantastic because it's much more inclusive, I think, at Leeds. But again, you know, when you get to HG, you still have these conflicts, you still have these tensions a little bit. So what I found at the end of all this, I was thinking, how do we get around this deficit model? And when Claire asked me to do this, Claire asked me to do so to reflect on like the positives a little bit. She said, I don't want a negative things. I want to try and be a little bit like happy, you know. I don't want to be all saying it's all bad, because there's lots of good things and we should celebrate them as well. I think we can get around the deficit model. I think there's a way around it. I think it's about achieving belonging. I think it's about operating in and opening spaces that allow students like just to be who they are. I think it's about allowing our community values to stay with us, like the WP work I've referenced and talked about. I think it's about empathy. I think it's about understanding. I think it's about really understanding the nature of disadvantage, and it's about diversity and not treating students like a homogenous whole as well, as I mentioned before. But really, I think it's about staying radical and open-minded, maybe treating this like a political project, actually saying we need to step on some toes and do something that makes us better. Maybe we should not be afraid to do that a little bit and start recognizing that maybe this won't change until we do that a little bit as well. So I'm going to close up there. I think I'm on 16 minutes or 17 minutes. I'm sorry if I've gone over a little bit. I'll stop there and I'll pass on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Adam. I found that really, really interesting. I really liked, you know, the ways that you, yeah, I guess balanced when you were talking about like the impacts on both students and staff alike, and I guess how your own experience, kind of how you felt that shift going from, you know, being a student to a lecturer. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing those stories. And yeah, again, as I said after Eve's presentation, I'm sure we'll come back to this in the discussion at the end. So yeah, be prepared to possibly talk about it a little bit more. But yeah, thank you so much. I believe that the next speaker I'm handing over to is Luke Andrews, who is a second year sociology and politics student, and who's going to be talking about some of the work that he did on his 2020 Laidlaw project. So if I could hand over to you, Luke.
Hi, thank you, Carolina. I'm just going to share my presentation. Can you all see the presentation? Perfect. Yeah. As Carolina just says, my name's Luke. I study politics and sociology. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about higher education and working class representation. So I'm going to be taking more of a focus on student experiences in higher education. So going straight into it, I just wanted to talk about the importance of representation. I think in higher education, historically, we've had predominantly white, predominantly middle-class students coming into university. Particularly, this is true for Russell Group universities. And I think this repetition of a traditional student entering university has produced a dominant culture which reflects the traditional student. However, when you've got a dominant culture, you're going to have exclusionary practices, which causes some students from particular groups to experience higher education from an othered perspective. I think that this is particularly true for working class students, white in participation students, so first generation, and this is likely to disadvantage them in a series of ways at their time at university. So, for example, some students have reported feeling the need to conform to a dominant culture. It's the notion that we can't be who we are in order to succeed. We have to act in a certain way, as Adam just touched on. And I think that this has a lot to do with the deficit model, but we can overcome it. And I do believe we're seeing progress in enabling students from all different walks of life in succeeding at university. I think, secondly, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the sense of belonging. I think there's a growing body of research at the moment, which is really highlighting how important that sense of belonging to a community is in higher education. I think it's highly linked with academic success and enhancing student satisfaction. When you feel as though you belong, you're much more likely to stay motivated and succeed. And I think this sense of belonging is rooted in an inclusive learning environment, which enables that sense of community to develop. It's actions such as interpersonal relationships between academic staff and students, which contributes to this sense of belonging. So little things such as staff knowing the names of their students, so when they pass them, they recognize who each other are. I think that really makes people feel like they are valued. I definitely feel valued when people recognize that my name. It's like when you go to a restaurant, you learn the name of your waiter, because it just makes you more comfortable in that environment, and it also makes them more comfortable in that environment. And then my third point for this slide, I think representation is really central to our sense of belonging. Inclusion requires the consideration of all aspects of a person's identity. And I think a common barrier in achieving inclusion is the prioritization of one element of a person's identity over another. So, for example, many opportunities will aim at improving the representation of a specific group. However, when this occurs, the opportunity doesn't take into consideration the intersections. So, for example, a person from an ethnic minority background, their experiences are going to be different if they're a person from an ethnic minority background who also identifies as being from a working class background or is a person with a disability. So I think to be inclusive, we have to consider all different aspects of a person's identity and really accept them as a whole. And I think that's something that we need to improve in higher education. So an inclusive learning environment to me exists when an individual is not targeted based on a singular element of their identity, but instead is accepted as a whole and is able to engage and integrate with higher education based on who they are. And when this happens, when we have inclusion, people won't need to feel like they have to conform to a certain identity in order to get along at university. I'm going to move on to my second slide now. So just for a little bit of context, I know Caroline mentioned that I was a Laidlaw Scholar, and my research last year focused on inclusive learning at our university of Leeds. This was a student survey that I produced. So the quotes that you see on this slide are actually quotes from my report. So I just want to go straight in. And as mentioned on the previous slide, representation has a significant impact on the sense of community experienced at University of Leeds. And when we have that dominant culture, this quote shows how people do feel like they have to conform. So one respondent recorded a conversation with another student completing their PhD at our university. And the quote says, he had to change the way he spoke, his appearance, his whole identity in order to fit in or comply with what was expected. This experience has also been described by Bordeaux as feeling like a fish out of water. It is a state where the dominant culture does not feel natural. And I think in this state, it really amplifies them feelings of exclusion and unfamiliarity within the higher education system. And as a result, further alienates the student from the university. So representation is going to be a really integral step into removing this dominant culture that people feel the need to conform to. Secondly, I just want to talk about opportunities a little bit, because having relationships, as I've mentioned before, is really integral to feeling part of the university network. And I just don't believe that these opportunities are quite equal yet. So one respondent has said that financial issues are a barrier. Also, events do not adapt to include parents, carers, or community students. Most events are for traditional age and class students who live on campus. And to me, this quote really highlights the experience of a widening participation student who has had to overcome several restraints in accessing opportunities. And when you aren't able to access these opportunities, you feel excluded, like the university doesn't really want you there. And if you can't access these opportunities for all of these different reasons, then you don't have that same chance to integrate. And if you don't have the chance to integrate, you aren't going to feel part of a community, and the process of higher education is going to become more and more exclusionary. You're going to become more alienated. So there has to be a big prioritization of making events and opportunities accessible for everyone. And like I've said before, this means considering multiple characteristics, not just focusing on one element of a person's identity. I'm going to move on to my final slide now. So on my right, we have a visual representation of my findings from the survey. And what these words mean is the characteristics that students have said really embody the sense of belonging for them. So on the left, I've produced a series of recommendations that I think really enable these characteristics to be implemented in the higher education. So events, opportunities, and resources must be made accessible for everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about Changing Perspectives, which was an initiative to really promote an inclusive university. And they hosted a careers event which did not require students to wear smart attire, therefore accommodating for working class students who may not be able to afford this attire. And this really enables students to feel included and able to access the same opportunities and resources as more traditional students. And I think this is a massive step in higher education, and we just need to see more events like this that are accommodating for everyone. And to do this, you really need to think about who you're excluding when designing an event. Secondly, it is necessary to ensure that all members of the learning community are included and able to engage, because the system doesn't work if we're just focusing on one element of the community. That's why there's a dominant middle class culture that exists. So we need to make sure everyone has the same chance to engage. And lastly, we need a focus on representation as a whole. By this, I mean there needs to be a deep understanding of intersectionality, understanding that individuals share many experiences whilst also having their differences can really strengthen that sense of community. Accepting people as a whole free of judgment encourages mutual respect amongst students. And I think that's the thing. I think with working class representation, it's the idea of us and them, and that's what we need to remove. With accessibility, we will remove all of the barriers that stop students feeling part of a whole. Thank you guys very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Luke. Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed kind of listening to your perspectives and kind of some of the work that you'd gotten up to last year during your Laidlaw project. I thought, yeah, I think obviously it's really important, the kind of the points that you raised about representation and intersectionality. I think particularly, you know, the idea of making sure that we're not kind of, yeah, looking at students but through the lens of like one particular characteristic, and that it is, you know, those intersections that kind of make up a lot of your experience. And I think there's an interesting parallel there with kind of, yeah, bringing people together, but also identifying their different needs and kind of how the different intersections of their identity make up their identity, but also in the sense of kind of one of the things that we touched on like near the beginning of the session about not looking at students as yeah, kind of like one mass that kind of all have the same experiences, but also, you know, bringing them together. I think it's an interesting kind of tension there. But yeah, thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed that. So I believe for our next presentation, I am inviting Claire Molson, who is the Academic Engagement Manager here in LUU. Yeah, I'll just hand straight over to you.
Hi everyone, I'll try and share my screen. So I suppose this is, my name's Claire Molson. I'm one of the Academic Engagement Managers at LUU. I'm also a postgraduate candidate at York St John University, and I work with Adam. And I'm looking at first generation students who are studying medicine. But before that, so this time last year, I was coming towards the end of my MA at Leeds in the School of Sociology and Social Policy. And I've also been a school rep. So I suppose this is the first time I've ever presented at conference as an employee, which I've tried not to be that professional chameleon and still get a sense of who I am and what I do and why I do that through. So since I started my role at LUU, my role involves looking after student reps, supporting them with their initiatives, supporting academic issues across the university, particularly with a focus on environment and engineering. So that's where I'm sort of based. But also I work on the wider partnerships. And over this last few months, I've been asked more than ever, does social class, does it matter? You know, we've got this idea that once we're at university, we're all the same, we're just students. And I think working class, the very words are contentious, because the research shows that most people who are working class don't even call themselves that. The days are gone of those traditional working class roles where it's obvious, you know, you're working class, you have a different role, you work in an office, whatever, and all that's changed. But what working class people tend to refer to themselves as is people like me, or that's not what people from where I live do. And I think while we're not using the words working class, that shows an awareness of that social positioning, that despite the fact that we're not saying that I'm working class anymore, we recognise that our opportunities are limited by being people like me or where I live. And I suppose I've entered the world now where if I was to take a class survey, it would probably come out on a different scale to where I was born, my education level, the place where I work, my postcode, all those things. But when we say, does social class matter? It matters for other reasons. So I'm going to start the talk by talking about education, because that is my area that I've studied for the last 6 years. And then I want to talk about why class matters and why it should always matter. So here we go. But my printer broke, so I've not got notes. So if I make mistakes, well, I'm human. So I suppose COVID has taught us a lot. And we sort of became collectively indifferent. We've just said, yeah, the working class are there. Yeah, they don't try hard enough and it's okay. Some might, some don't. And we've forgotten that the school system's stratified. But from the inception of education, it always has been stratified. And much of the post-World War consensus came because grammar schools became free and working class kids still were educated to get working class jobs. So, but over the years with the widening participation agenda and policies such as educational excellence everywhere, we seem to have forgotten that your postcode and your family background and your ability to effectively play the education game, move to a better postcode, and all those things will still restrict the education you receive. So within my wider research, something called the Right Mix, the British Medical Association started, and it started from a dean of the medical school visiting a school in London. And when he asked the teacher, when he said to the teacher, this young lad needs to be a doctor, she said, oh, there's not a school within the local 3 boroughs that would get him the A-levels to get into medical school. And I think we've always known that, and those of us that research education, we know that these inequalities are massive, and yes, they still exist. But last August, we saw that for ourselves when an algorithm was created to give our young people grades. And the algorithm was based on not just teacher predicted grades, not just on what young people had submitted throughout the year, but it were also judged on the results of the school that they attended for the last 3 years. So if Albert Einstein had sat his A-levels last year in a school in Bradford, the chances are his predicted grade would have dropped 24%, just like the young people on the screen. And I think we've got to recognise that these young people do not have equity in education. So when they come into university, they've already climbed a mountain to get there. So all this idea of deficit, that actually could be turned on its head. How did they fight a system or work in a system set against them and still come to a Russell Group university? So I think the young person holding the sign, how can I value a system that doesn't value me? I think that's the bit we need to change, and recognise, not just say, oh yeah, it happens, but recognise that these young people who have had to really, really struggle to get a place should be valued for being trailblazers. They've not got a smooth trajectory. But then in this country, we're told that we just need to work hard. And I think, as the picture shows, some people are given a ladder and some people are given a bottom rung, and how they get up the ladder will differ depending upon the background. We know statistically social mobility is pretty much stopped, and that was in 2012. So even the young people who are coming to university have got less chance of accessing the professions, those traditional professions such as medicine and law, because they're still reserved for people who've got a family history of being there. So when we're saying, oh, well, widening participation, we need to give extra, perhaps we should be saying, how did they do it? And how can we duplicate that? And I think it's this whole notion of shame and fault, because the working class know that they're being judged. The position in society is being judged, not because of them, but because of this meritocratic ideal that we've all got the same chances, we just need to work hard. So they're being held morally responsible for all the structural inequalities. And yet they still come to universities such as Leeds and thrive. So for me, the lessons that we need to learn in the sector are not what the additional stuff are, but what can we learn from them? Because learning is always two ways. And I think there's been lots and lots of research. So Bell Hooks looks at this idea of shame. And I think it's interesting that it's been covered so much throughout this. And this idea that, well, we've given them money and they still can't do it. But this internalisation is huge. So yesterday in the House of Commons, Prime Minister's question time, Boris Johnson said, those who've worked hard and can afford private tutors for their children are doing so. The government are providing funds for the others. And this assumption that the working class don't work hard is a lot of what causes this deficit, that we've just not worked hard enough. If we look at the ladders, it's harder to get up the first one than it is the second, yet our students still do it. And I think this idea of shame, you're not working hard enough. Danny Dorling tells us this is how to get away with it. It's a weapon, it's a stick to hit you with. So shame is a weapon that they use, but it's a weapon that you use upon yourself that makes you feel useless. And I think until I started my studies as a mature student, I never really considered shame. So for the first time ever, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background, because I've always I've hidden it. I've spoken through research. So if this goes wrong, this is Dr. Adam Formby's fault, because he inspired me to do it. So I wanted to talk today about learning beyond the grades. What's the motivation? So for me, school wasn't something, we went to school, we left school at 16, we got a job. There wasn't any, and this was sort of, I'm going to say early 90s. And it wasn't something that was ever considered that we would progress. Not because our parents didn't care about us, but you see, people like us have got a ceiling. And I think my motivation to come to Leeds were two pretty life-changing things. So 2012, my mum went into hospital with a cold, and 3 hours later she died. And I think my mum was everything that I am proud of. She cared about people. She was strong, and it never did anything wrong to anyone. And I think, but she died with massive regrets, because she did what many working class women do, and she accepted her lot, that her position in her life was to be a mum and to clean up after other people. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's what she believed. And she died just accepting that lot. And I think the sadness throughout the family of somebody who thought that she wouldn't make a whole was massive. And then the second thing that motivated me to come to university was, I was a governor at a school. And this school were in an inner city of Bradford. There were lots and lots of young people struggling with special educational needs, poverty, which there's a huge connection, and the parents didn't know where to turn. So as Sen Governor, I set up a parents group. And the difference, so by enabling the parents to actually say, wow, you're good at that, let's write your CV, I'll give you a reference. It enabled them to make changes for their own families. But within that system, because I was basically over two fences, around the professionals' fence and the parents' fence, the professionals were saying these kids have got no chance, that's who the parents are, the poor. And at 7 years old, a child with special educational needs in this country is often, and the evidence shows it, written off, because education's not for them. And I think, so I came to university to understand why. Why did my mum die? Just accepting that were her position in life, sad. And why are those kids being written off? And I think the first time I realised, obviously I was working class, but I worked in NHS. It is got a hierarchy, but it's massively understood. It's understood, everybody's social position and the professional position is understood. So it's quite easy to work in. And I came to university and I started to learn. And genuinely, I thought university was just learn why these kids were being written off and find a way to stop it happening. And through sociology, I stopped being ashamed. And I think I realized that actually I made life choices based on the options available. I didn't make life choices poor life choices because I'm a bad person. We were just getting on with our life. And I think when I realized that actually it wasn't our fault, we don't decide where we're born and we don't decide these things. And I think when people say, does class matter? To somebody from that background, you're saying, does your family matter? Does the fact that you have less options than somebody who's not working class, does that matter? Does it still matter? Because meritocracy really doesn't exist. The opportunities are not the same. And I think, so it could have been really negative, but I changed it into a positive and I became school rep. And through that work as being school rep, we built a school community. I was one of the co-founders of Changing Perspectives, and we listened to students. And the international students were telling us they wanted to mix more with the home students. And the working class students were saying they wanted to mix more with everybody. So we set up events. But every time we set up an event, rather than thinking, who is this for? We thought, who will this exclude? So those positive benefits to our learning community happened, yes, because of our work and commitment, yes, because of our working class commitment to community, but also because we got buy-in from the senior leaders. So I think there's a notion, well, you know, they don't really want it. Well, ask them. And I think where I wanted to end is the benefits have been included. And through Changing Perspectives, we created a trip to Whitby. And people there, regardless of age, we made sure that people could access the bus. The dean paid half of the coach so that it was affordable. We've set the walk in 3 stages, so the young, fit people could start really far away, and us older ones could have a bit of a plod that didn't turn out to be a bit of a plod, but anyway. And there is potential to learn from each other, but we've got to be willing to break down this idea of defective and subcultured, and we've got to be able to say everyone in our community has got value and worth, but it takes everyone to do that. And I'll leave you there.
Thank you so much for that, Claire. Yeah, thank you for kind of sharing such personal stories. I really appreciate that, you know, you felt comfortable enough to do that. And I feel like it's been really interesting to hear about, yeah, both kind of how your research has, you know, shaped your way of thinking, but also, you know, how your experiences have kind of led you to want to do that research. Yeah, so thing, and I'd love to hear more at some point, really, to be honest. But yeah, without further ado, I believe we have another speaker, but it appears someone's joining. Oh, perfect, right on time. That was amazing. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire. Yeah, so I believe just in time. Hi, Caesar. So yeah, I believe I'm going to be handing straight over to you, if that's okay. Yeah, you've arrived with perfect time. So yeah, so this is Caesar Dubé, who is a 3rd year cultural and media studies student, who's going to talk a little bit about intersectional identities and creating spaces for marginalized learners. So I'll hand straight over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, I'm so glad I came on time. So I just wanted to talk briefly about intersectionality, because I think that the discourse around sort of like working class students isn't always inclusive of the experiences and the reality that they face. And while I don't speak for all working class students, and while I don't speak for all Black people, I thought it'd be good to maybe share my experience and kind of highlight how intersectionality works in that way. So before I go any further, I'd kind of like to clarify what intersectionality is from Kimberly Crenshaw herself, since she's the one that created the theory. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a lawyer, and she's currently a professor at Columbia, and she developed the theory. And she realized around in the 70s, sort of like maybe civil rights era, that there was an attempt in the law and courts to separate how Black women were treated. In her 1976 paper, Crenshaw argues that treating Black women as purely women or as purely Black ignores specific challenges that Black women face. And I'd like to add on to that, David French, who's a writer for the American Review, kind of illustrated in how intersectionality worked by saying an African-American man is going to experience the world differently than an African-American woman. Someone who's LGBT is going to experience the world differently than someone who's straight. Someone who's LGBT and African-American is going to experience the world differently than someone who's LGBT and Latina. It's this sort of common sense notion that different categories of people have different kinds of experiences, end quote. So that being said, I'd like to talk about my path into higher education and hopefully illustrate how different factors have sort of impacted my experience and journey. And I want to preface this by saying, as I've said already, that while I do consider myself to be working class from my personal experience and also statistically, I have to acknowledge that I've had more advantages than some working class children, and that they've not been afforded the opportunities that I've had, mainly because of my parents and the things that they've done for me and my siblings, especially my dad. And I say this to say that working class people, just like Black people, are not a monolith, and you can be comfortably working class and grow up in a home, a two-parent home with a double income household where money's not much of an issue and where your parents had time to invest in your education, or you could come from a single parent household where, you know, money is, you know, a struggle and anxiety. You have to rely on free school meals, and your single parent has to work 3 jobs to make ends meet, and due to no fault of their own, they can't invest in your education as much as they would like to. So again, I repeat, working class people are not a monolith. And for the majority of, you know, my life, I think I've been shielded from the harsher experiences. And I must admit that I did spend a lot of my childhood just listening to Hannah Montana soundtrack, just having fun, and staring at the picture of Taylor Lautner on my bedroom wall. And if any of you don't know Taylor Lautner, he's the werewolf from Twilight. So as you can see, I had a good time. And but that also doesn't mean that my parents didn't struggle financially or that they don't struggle at all. But I just want to say, in the grand scheme of things, I'm aware that growing up, I had some privileges academically that I'm also going to highlight this during this sort of interaction. And I think secondary school for me was sort of this like big reality check, where I sort of realized that many of, you know, wonderful people that I was surrounded with that were bright, had loads of potential, had so many things working against them, as well as I had such amazing teachers who really cared, but they were just overworked, underpaid, and they didn't actually have the resources to teach us the way that they would want to. And just an example of a few experiences I had at school that might illustrate this. So I was really lucky in year 9 that I got to take the maths GCSE early. My school decided that. And if I didn't pass that time, it was okay, because they were like, you can just retake it in year 11. But my school could afford that, although working class school. And it just happened that I passed my maths GCSE in year 9 and never had to worry about it again, although I did, because that's the person I am. And when I share this story all the time, I kind of wonder how about the other people surrounding schools who didn't have the same opportunity to have a maths GCSE already in the bag in year 9, and how that could have affected their path into higher education. So just thought for everyone. And then even fast forward to year 11, our science teacher sat us down, a few of us down, and said, you know, I think you have great potential and the school would love to pay for you to take the triple science exam so that you can get an additional GCSE. And we feel like you can do it, but there's not going to be anyone to teach you the content. We don't have the time, we don't actually have the resources. So here's an AQA revision guide. If you want to do it, we'll pay for it. But you're on your own, basically. And it was really adorable. We had this little study group of like 16-year-olds. We had no idea what we were doing. We just memorized the AQA revision guide. And that was sort of normal to me. And it wasn't until years later where I spoke to friends who had gone to private schools or grammar schools, and I realized that this was not normal for them. And it was actually quite, you know, sad and reflective of the barriers that working class children face in schools, and also the limitations that teachers often face too. But the thing is, you know, that sort of made my experience somewhat different from those kids that I was in the study group with. I got to go home, hang out with my dad, who I'm really close with. I got to chat to him, and I got to talk about my issues and my problems and how I, you know, was struggling and didn't believe in myself. And my dad would say, you know what, I believe in your academic abilities, you can do this. And I just think not everyone, you know, had that, especially where I grew up, and not, like I said previously, not every parent had the time while working several jobs to sort of be fully invested in their children's, you know, academia, at least how they would have wanted to. So for me, that was a real big push to feel like I could do and achieve anything. And I know not many of my peers didn't feel that way. So an example of my privilege in this case, and I also would like to kind of bring up the question again, for those people that didn't have that support from, you know, one parent or two parents, for those people that didn't have anyone to believe in their academic abilities, how did that affect their path into higher education? So after that, I went to college, and college was interesting. It was a space that definitely changed my life academically, because I was learning new things, but also I got sick when I was around 16, and all of a sudden I was exhausted all the time, whether I slept or not. I was in constant physical pain and struggled some days to even walk up the stairs. And my personal tutor, who was really supportive, would always remind me, don't forget to use the lift. So for a 16-year-old girl who had a natural flair for the drama in life, you can imagine this was like the end of the world. But somehow I managed to become a student president, which was a terrible move on my part, because but I just felt like I wanted to do whatever I could to stand out on the university application. And I felt like because I got sick, I had this added layer of challenge, limitation. And I was like, okay, I need to do something else. I need to do more. And I think that's my experience really of education, that feeling that I need to do more, I need to stand out, I need to be better in order to have, you know, the same level of opportunities as those people who didn't have those limitations. And those 2 years were really difficult for me. I had complete brain fog, and I struggled to concentrate in lessons. And to my disappointment, in the subjects that I loved, like psychology and media studies, where I'd gotten, you know, some of the top grades in the year before, I averaged a B, and my parents were so happy. They were like, congratulations, good job. And I was devastated, because I was like, because that feeling being like, okay, well, I have to be better, and I've not been better, and therefore I might not have the same opportunities as everyone else. And that's the constant, I think, struggle in your mind that I've been really aware of since I was little, not only because I'm, you know, a Black woman, but also because from a working class background, and I've been very aware that people like me don't often get these opportunities unless they stand out. So after that, after finished secondary school, college, I felt better. So I decided to volunteer for a little bit. And when I came back from volunteering, I was like, okay, I'll go to nursing school. And that shocked everyone. To the surprise of everyone, I went to nursing school. And the irony is that my mom, she's worked in the NHS for a very long time, and she works in the mental health unit. So that has been my reality. I saw her doing that most of my life, and working late nights. But my parents I didn't have that pressure from my parents to work in STEM or to work in health. My parents, unlike other, you know, minority parents or immigrant parents, were very much like, knowledge for knowledge, learn for learn, follow your dreams. But still, somewhere along the line, I had internalized that messaging that many working class students internalize, that many people of color internalize, that you have to have a solid job, you have to do something that has a job afterwards. There's no point in going to university just to learn. And obviously that quickly changed because I was not happy in nursing school. I just did not enjoy it. And I decided to leave. And it was only a few months, but I also think that's a proper highlight of my privilege. One, that I had the backing of my parents sort to follow my dreams, not knowing what they were, but just knowing that this wasn't it. But also that I was able to like do that. And I think, you know, how many, you know, working class students or people of color have the privilege to sort of try again or wait until they figure out what they want to do. So I don't know, maybe that's something that you should think about if you're listening right now. So after I'd left nursing school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like I said, I just knew I loved having these conversations. I love culture. I love talking and writing about racism and working class experiences. And I really wanted to do something that I felt personally rewarding. But then I was like, there's no way I'm going to get into university. Like, this is 4 months over the deadline. And if I do, I'm not going to get to, you know, a university that's higher up on the league tables. But then I was looking at the syllabus for the University of Leeds and I saw cultural and media studies, and I went through the syllabus. My immediate thought was like, I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. Although there was no evidence going towards that. I just didn't feel like I could do it. And then I was like, I looked at media and communication and I was like, oh, I can do that. I don't feel like I guess I've got nothing to lose. And at that time, my uncle, who's an academic, to help me with my personal statement. Although he said he didn't do much, I feel like he helped a lot. And that was a privilege, that I was very confident about my personal statement and that I had someone who could help me. And I think how many people don't have their uncles who, you know, are academics that can help them with their personal statements. Anyway, so I applied for the media and communication. Foundation year back up because I did not feel confident in my abilities. There was no logical reason why I did not feel confident in my abilities, but nevertheless, I applied for the foundation year and the media and communication, and I got an email through, and I was like, from the university, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you the foundation year. Then I got an email through after that, and they said for a meeting with cultural and media studies, the degree that I did not apply for because I felt stupid. And then I went and I was like, this is probably a mistake, but I'll just go and I'll convince them that I deserve to be there. And when I went there, the most crazy thing happened. They were trying to convince me that I should be on this course with them and that they felt like they needed me. And I was like, you do know I didn't apply for this. And the lady gave me the interview, the professor, she said, yeah, but someone in media and communications passed on your personal statement and they thought that you'd be a really good fit for us too. So we want you to be with us and media and comms want you to. But if you come on with us, you get to have the best of both worlds because part of your degree will also be in that school. And it was just this like surreal moment to think that the degree that I thought that I was completely stupid for, that I did not apply for in the first place, was a degree that wanted me and the degree that I got on. But I just also think, what if the person in the department didn't see my personal statement and thought to like pass it on? You know, would my experience of higher education be different? And again, that's just another example of my privilege and my experience in higher education. And 10 minutes later, I mean, she did it right there and then, and she said, you know what, we want to give you an unconditional offer. And she did it right there and then. And 10 minutes later, I got, you know, the email saying you've got an unconditional offer, and here I am. I'm going into my third year and I've really, really loved my degree. I think Fairhax, shout out to Fairhax, is such a special place. And I've had just such support, and I've just had such professors and mentors who really are invested in what they do and what they write. But I think the reality of higher education for people that come from backgrounds like me, it's not always fun. It's not always a place where you feel comfortable or safe or like you belong. And, you know, whether it's me being one of 2 Black students in my class or in my course, or me being one of few working class students, or, you know, my working class friends or my Black friends or my friends who are ethnic minorities writing about their experiences and then being worried that the person who read it will have no idea what about that experience, and because that person won't understand, they'll get undermarked, or their message will get lost, and just stuff like that other people might not have to worry about. And even me, I spend a lot of my time academically writing about belonging, writing about Black, brown experiences, writing about working class experiences. And I'm very much aware, ironically, that I'm writing about racial issues, Black people, for white people to read, because I have not had a lecture, a professor that looks like me, or that looks close to me in any way. And that's something important to remember. But I think with saying this and kind of stating these things, I just wanted to say to those who feel like they don't deserve to be here that you do. I mean, I am a person that naturally has imposter syndrome, and whether the reality is I've averaged out, first this year, and I don't say that to be boastful, but I say that to highlight that whether it's my first or my seventh verse, I always wonder if I deserve it, or if I worked harder, or I end up feeling like I should even work even harder. And I know that is sort of a headspace that a lot of us are in, but I just want to encourage you and say that you do deserve to be here, and that you have a lot to bring and a lot to offer, and that you should be comfortable in that, however challenging your experience of higher education might be. So in conclusion, I am Black, yes, I am a woman, yes, I'm working class, and at times I've had physical limitations and health challenges, and all these things have shaped my experience of education. Some of these things more than others, but they still have, and that means my experience is different to other people. Some of you have had added experiences of being LGBTQ+ or disabled, or have had mental health challenges. These things and more matter too, because they shape your experience of not just life, but of education. And I just say these things to highlight that the diaspora of working class people is diverse, and everyone's story is different and should be considered, because everyone has different barriers, and not everything is equal, as we know, but because of these varied experiences, we all have something unique to bring and give to higher education. So not only do you need higher education, but you'd be surprised that higher education needs you more than you need it. So yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Caesar. I really think that you're, that kind of final closing point about, the varied experiences amongst working class people, and the way that kind of their different intersectional identities kind of play into that has really been shown today in all of our different speakers. We've had a really big range of experiences and perspectives, and I've really appreciated listening to those today. There's roadworks going on outside, which I really hope you can't hear. I'm just going to pray that the mic isn't picking that up. Great timing. But yeah, thank you so much, Caesar. I think some of the things that you said really resonated with me, particularly things about, feeling like you need to do more, or that you need to kind of fit to this like prescribed model of success, even if those pressures are kind of implicit. I thought that was really, really interesting. I think what we're going to do next is move on to a bit more of a discussion. So I am just going to quickly introduce you to Suman Tanvir, who also known as Sue, who is here from the School of Sociology and Social Policy. She's a school rep, and she is joining our discussion panel. So feel free to kind of address any of your questions to her if you'd like to. If you'd like to hear the student perspective or academic representative perspective. I'd like to kind of just open it to the floor, really. I hope that, Mel's just said that she can't hear the roadworks, that's good. Brilliant. So I'd like to just open it to the floor, really, and ask if there's anything that anyone wanted to talk about. Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just, I want to thank everybody for that. This is the most interesting get-together I've had in years. Not that I get together much, because I'm a bit of a recluse. But I wanted to add that although we have different experiences, a lot of us have had the same experiences. I'm working class. I didn't come into education until I was late. And in fact, University of Leeds wouldn't have touched me with a barge pole when I was younger. According to my wife, I was feral when I was younger. Don't know how she knows because she lived in Liverpool. But anyway, the thing is, I come into education just to discover who Karl Marx really was. And I still haven't yet, but I'm working on it. But what I notice is that we also should believe in ourselves. We've got to listen. If I can make good in education, anybody else can, as far as I'm concerned. And people, students that are here or whatever, get that on board. Believe in yourself. Because when I first started, thought I'm with the bright young things of education. I was so daunted. Then I listened to them for a while. And I thought, you don't know a thing. I know more than you, and I don't have an education. And that's what motivated me. Yes, I was bullied when I was younger, up to the age of 13. If you've ever seen me, you know it doesn't happen anymore. But that's part of my learning experience. That's part of everybody else's. But to change it all within education, I think you've got to look at the demography of that, say, Leeds University, for instance, and particularly higher up. Having people in their ivory who come from their ivory towers is just not inclusive. And no matter how they protest so much, I don't believe they would. Now, the School of Sociology and Social Policy, as Adam forgot the social policy bit, is more inclusive, but it's still not absolutely inclusive. And there are still some working class people there, although that's getting less and less. But anybody that's studying within that department, anybody who's studying at Leeds, my door's always open when we get back. I am accessible and I'll help you through it. And that's all I wanted to say, really, without upsetting anybody.
Thank you for that, Simon. Yeah, thank you so much. I think one of the things that kind of stood out to me there, that also Caesar mentioned in her presentation, actually, that I forgot to pick up on, but was the idea of, yeah, I guess that tendency to kind of underestimate your abilities or your value, and kind of how important it is to avoid doing that, because kind of as we've heard today, and yeah, as we've heard today, those kind of doubts that you have about yourself and kind of, yeah, that are kind of almost imposed on you as well. I think it was Adam who talked about the self-fulfilling prophecy. Hopefully I'm right there. I think it was Adam that talked about that. Yeah, I think that it's very easy to feel that way, and it's really important that we try and kind of yeah, overcome that and kind of not underestimate just what you're actually capable of. Yeah, Claire, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of respond to Simon, and I think I get it. I get exactly what you're saying, Simon, but I think we know that the last decade has been difficult in terms of social policy and stuff, and I think we came in as mature students, and that's not to sort of diminish young people, but I think we had the ability to go home, and I think when you came, and when you go home, you've not got, so a lot of young people say to me that when they live on campus and then they go home to a working class family, that there's a real like upset in where they belong and how they can readapt. And I think as education changes, it gets more and more difficult to like make it advantageous and access those. So while I get it, and like I can say, yeah, I succeeded in X, Y, and Z, I think we need to keep recognizing that inequality, and that, because if we don't, we'll become indifferent again. So yeah, but Simon and I always argue, Carolina, so it's okay. I don't expect him to come back and probably abuse me by email later.
Thank you, Claire, for adding to that. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think it's healthy to have, you know, to have these kind of dialogues. So yeah, thank you so much. Would anyone else like to come in with a question or a comment? Yeah.
I actually do. I want to say that in terms of the self-fulfilling prophecy and the whole shame thing, I can relate to that so much more than I can even imagine, like right now, because in my first year, I actually dropped out of university because of imposter syndrome. I thought, I definitely don't belong here. I don't fit in with anyone. There's absolutely no one that looks like me. And then it was kind of like the university had the kind of just get on with it attitude, like I was supposed to know how to write essays, and I just didn't even know how to go about finding out what I needed to do. I had no help because I was like the first person to go to university from my family. So yeah, I dropped out of university in my first year, but then I kind of came to the realization after to be there just as much as anyone else, and then I kind of had time to reflect on that, and kind of I was really mad at myself for like putting myself down so much, like I don't deserve to be there, because I've seen other people from like a similar background do like amazing things at university too. So I was so inspired by other people, and not myself but other people, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give university another go. And then kind of like what Scissor was saying, that she felt like she needed to get involved a lot more to feel like she could catch up with other people. I did that. And once I did do that, like a school rep, and I applied to other things and just got involved with the community more, I felt like that's kind of how I felt a sense of belonging, that I was actually participating and I was actually doing something. So yeah, I feel like I understand that self-fulfilling prophecy and the shame, and like Claire, you said that people don't say that they're from a working class background. Again, I didn't say that. I didn't want to, I felt like I was already so out of place. I didn't want to like label it as well. So I did say a person from my background, and again, ethnicity came into that as well. So I felt like I was doubly disadvantaged and different from everyone else. So again, I didn't say I was from a working class background. I said, yeah, just people from my background and people that look like me and stuff. So I'd never really put a label to it. And I feel like that kind of brings the shame more to it, as if you are ashamed of where you come from. And I don't think I should have done that. And I felt like if I didn't like appreciate my difference and my experience from everyone else, I would have had a better time from the beginning. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sue. I think that some of the things that you mentioned there are definitely things that I can relate to as well. And I think, and I'm sure many people on this call also feel the same way. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I've just seen that Colin has popped a comment in the chat. Would you like to like expand on that at all? No pressure to, obviously, if you don't want to like turn your microphone on or anything.
Yeah, I just think that in some modules, the research is around how working class people do this, or how they're poor, or why they're obese, and it's sort of, there's no, it's sort of studying working class people from a middle class and upper class perspective. And I found some of that when I was doing my undergrad, that a lot of the literature, the reading lists were sort of, and I'm doing an MA now, and it's similar, that I'm sort of doing a module called War, Crime and Violence. And it says that, literature says, people from lower socioeconomic background are considered deviant, and all joining the army does is extend the deviancy. I think, it's sort of, it's like, it's the sort of representing through research the working class from an upper class and middle class perspective.
Yeah, thank you for expanding on that a little bit. I think, yeah, definitely can feel that way, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to repeat exactly what you said, but I think that, that it makes a lot of sense. And I think that perhaps there is more that can be done to kind of, I guess part of that is the representation side of things. If we have more people from working class backgrounds and from, wider different types of backgrounds kind of contributing to things like curriculum and that kind of thing, then you know, you'd hope that you'd avoid that kind of yeah, culture of it feeling like it is, you know, middle and upper class, I guess, like perspectives on like the working class experience, which is, you know, naturally not going to be as authentic as we might want it to be. So yeah, thanks for talking about that a little bit.
Can I just make an addition to that? I think there's a glass ceiling when it comes to sort of the hierarchical structures in universities, where there aren't so many working class professors or doctors or in the hierarchical structures which can bring sort of the working class perspective to the fore, if you like. Yeah,
absolutely. I think yeah, sorry, I was just looking at the chat to check if I hadn't missed anything. Yeah, okay, so sorry, just got a bit distracted there. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's something that Claire touched on a little bit as well earlier. But just in the interest of time, I'm going to stop waffling and hand over to Mel, who has her hand up.
You weren't waffling, Caroline. I was just, actually, you just brought up what I was going to kind of ask about, really. Do you think, because I went to university in Bradford, and I didn't really experience any of the people from there when I was learning there. It was there was wide ranges of backgrounds, and there was no, people just talked about like where they came from, and it didn't really seem to be a thing. And I was just, so my experience was very different. And I was a mother at the time, so I was like a very young mother when I was at university. So I had like a very different experience to even some of my peers. And I wondered if this was something that was quite Russell Group specific within this area, because like, as I say, my experience was so different. And like when I've worked and taught in sixth form colleges with very disadvantaged young people, they talk about their backgrounds openly. But at certain universities are for them either. So it's quite important to get people's take.
Thank you. Sorry, it was breaking up a little bit for me there, so I wasn't sure if you were done. I just wanted to wait. No, that's fine. It was only a tad bit. But yeah, thank you so much for that contribution. There are 3 more hands up, and I think that's probably the most that we're going to be able to take, unfortunately. Although I'm sure we could talk about this for several days on end, probably. But yeah, I'm going to pass over to Iwi, who has her hand up.
I actually think Simon was before me.
Oh, okay.
Wait until after Simon's. No,
Oh,
okay.
you're all right.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points, sort of that in my mind are linked to this notion of inclusion, and obviously sense of belonging is something that's come up a lot, and particularly with the point that I think it's Mel had just made around the Russell Group perhaps having a bit of a different culture to some of the other universities. So I'd mentioned in my presentation that I worked at Leeds Beckett. It was actually for 18 years, so it was a long time. I didn't always work on the academic side. I worked as an accountant there for the first, well, different finance roles for sort of the first 10 years before I moved over. And I would say the culture is very different. People are much more open and much more comfortable in talking about their backgrounds, and perhaps that is reflected by the diverse demography of the student population there. Yosso, I think, oh no, she's not on the call. Oh yeah, Emily. Emily knows about this paper by Yosso, which talks about community cultural wealth. And it's all really about kind of communities of practice and what's celebrated and what the norms are that are accepted in the group and the rules of the game. And as I say, what's celebrated. And I think one of the problems with inclusion is sometimes it is framed around people, as we've spoken about, changing themselves to kind of fit within the conditions of this particular community of practice. And I think this is something that's really prevalent in Russell Group universities compared with other universities. And this like identity politics that I talked about and the identity formation, all the complexity that comes with that, I do think it is a very Russell Group thing. And I think that when we talk about inclusion, where we need to be moving to is what everyone's talked about in terms of kind of celebrating diversity and difference, and the very unique experiences and insights and perspectives that as working class students or working class staff members we bring to the community, and that not being accommodated for as a nice to do, or we're making space for you because it's the right thing to do, to actually celebrate that and acknowledge that that brings real value to our community. And I'm not convinced that the way that Russell Group universities operate, even at Leeds, if I'm honest, that that's the case. So that's what I was going to say.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was some really insightful observations, and I think tied in obviously really nicely to what Mel kind of started talking about. So thank you. I think I'm going to hand to, Claire's put a quote in the chat saying inclusion can only involve the people who we see as part of the community, which I think is a really good point. And I think also one of the things that that Claire raised earlier that I thought was a really good way to look at things was when she was talking about how in planning events they looked at, instead of looking first at who is this aimed at, how do we tailor it to them, looking at who does this exclude and how do we avoid that. So yeah, thank you very much. I think I'm going to pass to Simon and then Sophie afterwards. So Simon, if you'd like to come in.
Well, basically, I'm going to reiterate what Iwi was on about. Is that pronounced right, Iwi? Yeah, it was talking about. Yeah, but this is also what I meant with the changing of the demography of the academics and the higher up structures within the University of Leeds, because including working class people should not be a tick box exercise. It should be something that's done because, as Iwi said, working class people have a lot to offer. And so working class people like myself, and I know that stops me, there is a glass ceiling, because I know I've gone as far as I can go, because I'm wrong side of the tracks. But, and we have to change the way that is so that people feel more comfortable within the academic environment. So more working class lecturers is important, more accessible lecturers, instead of this aloofness going around. And Claire knows this because she winds me up every time doing it. She calls me doctor. And she knows I hate that. I won't answer to it. I am Simon. That's it. If I want respect, I have to earn it. You know what I mean? Not just respect because I've got a qualification. So I have to prove to people that I'm worthy of their respect. And that's how I treat everybody. And that's how I think working class people should do react. And I think also that's why I always say I'm open to any conversations with anybody who's struggling, because we can't all just grow thicker skins and get on with it. Some people need help, and that help is there, but there's few and far of us in between. It sounds like Iwi had help as well, and Claire would, but she's at York now, so. Oh no, she's at Leeds as well. So yeah, let's please draw on those resources, because that's what we get paid for. And people shouldn't think that they can that they're bothering us. Nobody should give that impression. They're not bothering us. That's our job. And it just so happens I quite like doing that as well. So anyway, I'll just shut up because it sounds like a Simon Prideaux roadshow, which it's not.
Not at all. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really nice to hear and really good. I think sometimes people might be cautious to access that support and that help. But thank you. Yeah, I think it was really nice to highlight that it's there and it should be taken advantage of. Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. Sophie, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add sort of on the issue of like non-Russell Group universities and colleges with like more diverse backgrounds, is that I find it difficult to speak outside of a deficit model. So I'm apologies if I offend anyone. Like in terms of quote unquote disadvantage, that it's quite relative.
so that in non-Russell Group universities or more diverse colleges, maybe you're not considered as disadvantaged as you are in a Russell Group setting or a more elite setting, and how that impacts the way you act and behave and feel. Yeah, that was it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you've made. And as someone touched on something similar, actually, I can't remember exactly who it was, so forgive me. But yeah, I think, and that's something that I definitely relate to as well, having moved from a state school to a grammar school when I went into sixth form, and that, you know, that was definitely my experience. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for your contributions. Thank you to our speakers for kind of sharing and being so open and honest and kind of up for having these discussions. Yeah, I'd just like to thank you all. Thanks everyone for coming as well. A big thank you to Maddie and Claire for kind of putting this all together. And yeah, I really hope you took something away from this and that you enjoyed it, and hopefully some of these conversations can be picked up outside of this. That would be fantastic. Yeah, I guess it just falls to me to say thank you very much. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. There is a feedback form that has been posted in the chat if you have time to do that, and that would be much appreciated. And that's everything from me, I think. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was great. Really enjoyed all that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all doing all that extra work.
It's nice. It was really good event. Really enjoyed all that. Thank you for inviting me, Claire. Really, yeah, it's nice to talk. And see Simon again as always. You know, it's good to see everyone. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I think it just sort of highlights that we need more.
We do, absolutely.
Yeah.
And need to normalize it, as you were saying. You know, I thought your talk was so good because it was just, yeah, I thought you got that paragraph really nicely.
Well, I didn't have any notes because my printer broke, and then I couldn't anyway.
You couldn't tell. You couldn't tell. You did really well.
Claire, have you thought about a pen and paper?
Well, I tried to do that, Simon, but I was running out of time, and I'm sorry. But do you know, I just thought, because I've done that a lot at Leeds, I've sort of, and I think that idea is shame, and it was just coming up, and we do hide.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when you say that, Simon, I knew I could come to your office and be myself. I could go to Suzanne or Adam. Yeah. But I know with other academics, I changed the way I speak and stuff, and I think,
why?
Well, I don't, Simon, because it is that internalization that you're different, that you stand out. That, and I think it wasn't until after my MA that I thought, hold on a minute, I'm all right. I've never, you know, that idea is really difficult to grasp. Like when I came to Leeds, I was going to do social work, and they actually said to me, seriously said to me, yeah, but you'll only be able to do it if you've not got a criminal record. And I thought, why would I have a criminal record? But like that idea of,
I know,
you're judged completely, like, you know, and I think it's just challenging, but it'd be really great if we could get together and do more stuff and really get the students involved, because it pushes that idea that be confident in who you are. Like when I applied for stuff and didn't get it, Simon or Suzanne or whatever, I'd just say, well, it's their loss. And they tell you stuff like that until you believe it, and then you get rid of your shame.
Yeah, that's it. It's I think if you've got future events planned and stuff, or you want to do more stuff, just let us know. We're happy to get involved with things. I think that'd be really good. But yeah, I think the shame is a thing, isn't it? It's kind of assignment. I wonder if it's that thing where if you feel comfortable in yourself, you're able to just be like, well, I don't care, you know. But getting to that point, isn't it? Getting to that point where you can be like, I'm not.
No, I do accede certain things. I might appear as I don't care.